Hello, 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 everyone, and welcome back to Black Mental Health Matters. I'm Dr. Carryann Williams. I'm a psychiatrist here in Massachusetts, and this is a talk show that's about everything related to mental wellness in the Black community. So, if you'd like to participate throughout this show, you can give us a call at 617-238-7111. You can also follow along live on the Facebook stream, heat981fm.com. So thanks for joining, everyone. And today I have a special guest. Her name is Nieisha Deed, and she is here from Massachusetts. She's from Roxbury. And she's the founder of an organization called PureSpark. And Nieisha spent 15 years as a corporate accountant until she was diagnosed with a severe depression. And at that point, she was not able to return to work. But when she recovered from this, she founded her organization, PureSpark. And this is a platform that she uses to help educate the community on the importance of prioritizing their mental health. She's a mental health advocate. She shares her story. She's a public speaker. And she is helping with the recovery of others by being unafraid to share her personal story. So I want to welcome to the show, Nieisha Deed.
Thank you so much for having me. That was such an amazing introduction. I'm like, who is that lady?
So thank you for joining us. And tell us a little bit, what is PureSpark?
Yeah, so actually I started PureSpark probably back in 2018, and it was just a social media presence where I just basically shared, psychological information, like what is depression? What does it feel like? What is anxiety? What does it feel like? What does it look like? Just to kind of spread awareness. And then it kind of morphed into something different in 2020 when the pandemic hit. Actually, right before the pandemic hit, I decided I wanted to do some sort of peer support groups to kind of really reach people. Well, those peer support groups turned virtual because of the pandemic, and we've been doing it for about a year, where we basically share information with people about alternative ways of healing. So it's not only, like we talked about earlier, it's not only, taking your meds and therapy. It could be those things, but plus other things. So I just educate people on those plus other things portion. And then more recently, we just created a wellness directory on our website to kind of help be able to find culturally competent therapists and wellness professionals in the Massachusetts area.
So a lot of good things going on. We've got a wellness directory that you're starting to build up. There is an educational platform to let people know just the basics about mental health. And then also a peer support group to help people more directly with what they're going through. And so I'm curious to know a little bit about why you even kind of thought about starting this organization, and your background story. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what led up to you even wanting to do this. I mean, you were a corporate accountant.
Yeah, I know, right? Making six figures, doing pretty well. Yeah, so, I'll start there. So I decided to go into accounting really because of the money. I was not attracted to the profession at all. There was nothing exciting about crunching numbers. I just knew in 2005, when I graduated from Howard, I knew that the accounting profession was a need. Sarbanes-Oxley had just passed, and there was a big, big need for people. They needed people to do the work. They needed people to test internal controls, and all of this stuff. So, I kind of got plopped into the profession and thought, okay, I'm okay with it. I'll stay here. But then after 15 years of working in a profession where I wasn't, emotionally attached to it at all, it started to wear on me. And also being in corporate America, being a Black woman in corporate America, 6'2", natural hair, I knew, I oftentimes heard people say like, they were kind of afraid of me in a sense, especially as an auditor, right? We're the police, so I always tried to make myself less than and, try to come off, in a way that was more appeasing to people. And that kind of wore on me after 15 years. And that turned into severe depression, suicidal ideations. And then finally in 2017, December of 2017, a suicide attempt. And then, not to add more to the drama, right, that's occurring or happening, but I also lost another family member to suicide that following year. So I just got to the point where I was just like, okay. This is something that's not only bothering me, affecting me, it's affecting my family, it's affecting my friends, because my friend had lost her brother to suicide. And at that point in time, I said, you know what? I'm going to come out with my story. And I use the word come out, just like in the LGBTQ plus community. They use that term of like really showing your true self. Like, this is what I went through. Here are my battle scars. And it's okay. I accept what happened to me. And I want other people to feel safe enough to open up about what's happened to them as well. And that's how healing starts, right? You have to kind of accept what's going on and then kind of go from there. So it really started because I had got to the point where I was sick and tired of hearing about suicides in my family and my community. And I thought maybe by me sharing my story, just me sharing my story, maybe I can help somebody.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like this point where you think, why didn't we know about this so long ago? Why didn't anybody teach us about this stuff? Where was that instruction? Spent so many years going to school, so many years, I mean, university education, I mean, like corporate accountant, and realize nobody taught us about this. Nobody taught us about how to take care of our mental health. Nobody taught us how important it was to do things that help to prevent depression and what to do if you start to have thoughts of suicide. Like, what do you do next? Nobody taught us that. And so, tell us a little bit about the kind of the journey you had with even just the nitty-gritty of figuring out what was going on. Like, once you figured something was wrong and you said, you know what, I need to do something about this. How did you take those next steps to like making that change in your life?
Yeah, you're right, Dr. Carryann. No one teaches us about these things, and you kind of sometimes just learn as you go, or you have people like me or advocates that share their story, and then you learn from that. But you're right, we don't unfortunately have a system where we're learning about this in school. To answer your question, I first got diagnosed in 2008 with bipolar disorder. So I normally don't start my story from there because that wasn't the story that kind of changed the trajectory of my life. It had an impact, but I remember just trying to quickly sweep it under the rug. 2008, I was 3 years into my career as an auditor at Deloitte, and something traumatic happened. My sister had her own struggles with mental illness. And that was kind of the first time I saw it like in person with somebody super close to me and my family. It's my sister, we're a year and a half apart. And I felt like I'm supposed to be able to help my sister. And in this situation, I was so clueless. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to help her. I was like at my wits' end, doing all this stuff. And then my mental health started to decay because of the stress of, from work and the stress of not being able to help my sister and feeling like a bad person. So at that point in time in 2008, my mom had to deal with not only one sick, mentally ill child, but she had to deal with two. So we were both in the hospital at the same time. And I felt so guilty. I felt so ashamed. I didn't tell anyone. I just did whatever the doctor said so that I could just return back to normal. I was just like, and when that happened, right, I was like, what's going on with me? Do I have like a brain aneurysm? Like, is something going on with my brain, like my physical brain? And I went to a neurologist and all this stuff because I couldn't believe that it could be something else, I couldn't believe that it was something mental going on with me, But when I received the diagnosis and I kind of did everything that they told me to do, because I'm like a by the books person. They say do that, I do that. They say do this, I do that. And I'm like, okay, I graduated. I'm done. Now back to work. Let's just forget about that. Let's not even talk about what just happened to you. And then you're back to doing the things that probably put you in that same place, but you're ignoring it. And so in 2017, when it happened again, I knew exactly what it was, right? Because I had, the episode in 2008. And this time I felt even worse because I felt like, oh, I should have known, right? I should have known better this time around. The depression felt even worse. The first time around, I only had like suicidal ideations. I never had an attempt. This time I actually had an attempt, right? So I was like, okay, Nieisha, you can't play around with this, right? This is something that you have to take seriously. And I think that was God. If you believe in a higher power, for me, that was just God saying, here's your second chance. You know what I mean? You got to kind of work with it. And when I was able to kind of make it out of this deep, dark depression that lasted for almost a year and a half, I decided, okay, I made it out of this thing successfully for a reason. And the reason that I came up with is so that I can help other people and let them know that there's a way out of this and there are preventative measures that you can take.
And so for folks that may be listening, I wonder if they may have questions about like what are some of the signs that like maybe you tell people, like you say, well, here's some of the signs that you need to start looking to do something. Like what do you tell folks? Like, here's when it's time to like take action.
Yeah. So I always talk about it from what my warning signs were, because I don't want anyone to think that we're all the same, because I'm like, we're not all the same, we're different beings. But these were some of my warning signs. So I'm a person that when I get depressed, I don't eat. So I was losing a substantial amount of weight. Like I mentioned, my height, I'm 6'2", so I was down to like 143 or something like that. I was very, very small. And people thought that I, was suffering from like an eating disorder. And I'm like, I just don't have an appetite. I can't eat. And you can talk to people that study the body or whatever. And the connection between the brain and the stomach is so strong. And so for me, I couldn't eat. Now, for some people, they might overeat, but if there's a change in your appetite for a long period of time, you might want to look into that. Another sign for me that was like very, very huge and disruptive in my life was I couldn't sleep. I was an insomniac for a whole year. And the doctors would ask me, is it because your mind is racing at night? And I'm like, actually, it's the opposite. Like, I'm not thinking about anything. Everything has stopped. Everything in my life has gone to a complete halt. I even was diagnosed with catatonia, which is the distance of reality. Like, you are no longer connected with reality. So that was another thing. Also, other things that were severe, but weren't as physical, was I was distancing myself from friends and family. I was not as social, but that part had been lingering for a very long time because of work. Work was just like piling up. So I didn't have time to socialize. And then when I did, I just didn't want to be around people. I was exhausted. That was another thing. And then lastly, another thing that was very pervasive was just the negative self-talk. Just so much negative self-talk. I couldn't be positive if I wanted to. I was just so negative, like so negative about everything. I couldn't find the good in anything. And those things lasted for a while. And, they became so bad that they affected my ability to do my everyday job, right? And that's what deemed me disabled, right? Because I could no longer concentrate at work. I could no longer focus. I always thought people were upset with me and like all these not great things that just made existing very hard.
Wow. So there's, a lot of signs that basically, I guess I'd say for a listening audience, pay attention to your body, pay attention to your mood, and pay attention to shifts from baseline. So if things are normally a certain way for you and that changes and it's persistent and it's not working in your favor, pay attention to that. So for example, if there's a change in your eating pattern, you're eating more than usual or less than usual, and that's a shift from baseline and it's causing either weight loss or weight gain, that could be a sign that you're stressed or depressed, or that there's something going on. As Nieisha says, there is a gut brain connection that, again, sometimes people don't really talk about very much, but you can educate yourself about that, the gut brain connection. Also, sleep. Sleep is huge. Sleep is probably the first thing that gets disrupted anytime your body is off in any way. Even as simple as anticipating something that's coming up the next day, that can throw your sleep off. So having your sleep be off for a certain length of time kind of tells you something is up, and that could be not sleeping, not being able to fall asleep, waking up a lot. But for some people, it is that they're sleeping too much. They're just kind of sleeping all day and all night and not feeling like they're refreshed. And then Nieisha mentioned social isolation, this feeling of just not wanting to be around other people. And it could be for a lot of reasons. You should mention that there's some exhaustion. There's kind of like, oh, even if you're around, I'm just too tired to interact with you, or I just don't feel like it, or I just feel kind of negative right now, and I don't want to be around people with kind of a negative attitude right now. And then the negative self-talk, the kind of, sometimes we kind of call it like a pessimism, just this feeling of it's difficult to see a positive outlook. And that is the depression speaking. The depression is kind of telling you, yeah, there's nothing really good going on, nothing to look forward to, and then that can lead into, well, if there's nothing good to look forward to, why are you living? And, that kind of thing can just spiral and spiral until you feel like, why am I even alive? So these are some of the signs that you have to pay attention. If you start noticing these things, don't let it get too far. You mobilize your social supports, let somebody know. And even if you need someone to go with you to an appointment to help support you, make it happen. I don't know if you have any other comments on that, Nieisha.
Yeah. The only other comment that I have is that in my situation, it was definitely mental and emotional. But I would say for people, if you have a primary care physician, that's the first line of defense. That was the first line of defense for me in 2008, is just going to a physician, because there might be things that are off, like your thyroid might be off, right? And that can cause some of these symptoms. So just getting your checkup, with your physician to do some blood work, just to see if that's has anything to do with it, like your vitamin D and stuff like that, and then kind of going from there. Because a lot of times, what's going on in our physical bodies can affect our mental health, because we're all connected. And then also too, looking at your environment and seeing the environment that you're in. I had to leave corporate because the environment, right, was just not conducive to my mental wellness. I just could not be there. So, thinking about, your physical body, and also thinking about your environment and changing some of those things or looking into those things can also really help to improve your mental health.
No, I like that. Because a lot of times we are, and sometimes it's hard to change our environment, but if you can,
Yeah.
find ways to, make a plan. Sometimes maybe you can't leave your job right away, but you can make a plan to leave it, and figure out, okay, what do I need to do to get out of this environment? Do I need to start interviewing somewhere else? Do I need to kind of do this or that? What do I need to do financially? But make a plan to try to change the things that are causing you to be, I guess, depressed, and to kind of affect your mental health in multiple ways. Because I guess folks have different ways that they may have mental health issues. And primary care, I like that idea as well, because sometimes a PCP appointment might be the fastest appointment you can get. And it's good to rule out other potential things. So if you're feeling tired all the time, yeah, Thyroid issues can cause fatigue and depression. It can cause difficulty focusing, anemia, which is very common in women. Vitamin D, which in this part of the country, we're in the Northeast, there's not very much sunlight when it's in the winter, and we're finally starting to see the sun again because it's spring. Um, so it's, vitamin D supplements become really, really important. So you have to check those vitamin D levels. I'm from Jamaica, and I've never had to think about vitamin D. And I got my vitamin D levels checked, and it was low. And it's because I'm inside all day staring at a laptop and having Zoom meetings. So it's important to get those levels checked, guys. So, and even just thinking about your ability to focus at work, and if you're usually pretty on top of things, and now you're just feeling kind of tired and like you can't focus. Just paying attention to that. And so you have a question from Facebook. Our Facebook user Errol says, "Thanks for sharing, Nieisha. Listening to you, he's just wondering, do you feel like this is, I guess maybe in your case, do you feel like there was just the surroundings, or is it just like a chemical issue? Do you feel like it was certain experiences or memories or history that triggered it? What do you feel like were some of the factors leading up to the causation of some of this?"
Yeah, I think it's complicated, right? I don't think that I can necessarily say that it was one specific thing. I think it was a culmination of a lot of things just coming to a head in 2017. But as I was going through therapy and I was doing yoga and I was really starting to connect with myself, right? Because like the catatonia made me separate from myself. I was like, I don't even feel like I'm on earth. Like I feel like this is just weird. Where am I? But finally, when I was doing the talk therapy and I was doing the yoga, there was this metamorphosis where I felt like I was getting more connected with myself and kind of processing things. And as I was processing things and kind of learning more about myself and my traumas, and those things were coming to a head, I thought about, being a student in MECO, and always having to do what they call code switch, right? And thinking about myself as an African American and thinking about how we're portrayed on TV, and always trying to feel like I had to prove to the people that I went to school with that I'm not those people you see on TV. I am smart, I am intelligent, I am capable, I am this. So always having to feel like I had to put on a mask in order to go to school. And then, like I mentioned, right, I went to Howard for 4 years, and I was just like, oh, this is awesome. The HBCU experience, and I felt so at home. But then 4 years, into it, you graduate, and then I'm back in corporate America, right? So all of those maladaptive things that I learned when I was in MECO from first grade to 12th grade, I was using them again back in corporate America, not really even realizing that I was. But it was just something that my brain automatically just knew to do, because that was the program that I had built and I set, and it was working for 12 years. And I think, part of it was, right, what we're calling now the racial trauma, or the exhaustion that came from me feeling as if I had to change who I really was at my core. I couldn't bring my true authentic self to work every day. And that was something that, is perceived from me, right? No one really necessarily told me that, but, who I was bringing to work was getting celebrated. So why would I bring someone else, right? And so I think that really, just in general, one of the top things that I could, kind of see that was problematic was just the fact that I couldn't bring true, authentic Nieisha to work every day. And that was very destructive, extremely destructive, because I kind of got to the point where I didn't even know who I was. I didn't know what I liked. I didn't know what I didn't like. I was just so disconnected. So when I got to the point where I could actually celebrate who I was, and the first step of that was actually sharing my story and being okay with, this is a part of my story, my bipolar disorder, and all this stuff. I became okay. Like I became okay with who I was, and I actually loved who I was, and I actually didn't feel like I had to, change who I was depending on what group I was with. You know what I mean? I was okay with being myself. And I think that that's where the self-compassion came in, the self-love came in, and, just being better mentally and emotionally.
Wow. So there's kind of a piece of this where there is effect on one's emotional health when they feel like for such a significant thing that, like themselves, that they're kind of suppressed.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned Metco, and for those that are maybe not familiar with Massachusetts, Metco, can you just give a brief explanation of
Yes.
Metco?
So MECO is a program where they bus inner city students, inner city Boston students out to suburban towns for a quote unquote better education. So the city that I live in is Boston, and the town that I went to for my education was Sharon, which is a predominantly Jewish town. Not a lot of people of color living out in that town. So it was primarily the MECO students that made up the diversity in the school.
Okay, so it was kind of this program, I guess, where they wanted to make sure that you had access to better education and that there was, I guess, integration going on and different things.
Yeah.
But there's also a slight price to pay with learning how to code switch, learning how to have to deal with microaggressions, learning how to make yourself small, to make yourself accepted, and that sort of thing. And then you kind of went back to that after you had this kind of oasis of being empowered where you're like, yeah, these are my people. And then after that, you graduate and think, oh, okay, back into the real world.
Yeah.
And so there is kind of that experience that kind of, and again, you mentioned the idea of racial trauma that can contribute to priming us for some of these things. And, guys, I've spoken on the show about how we have an entire group of people in the U.S. that have experienced racial trauma of various kinds and now are experiencing mental health conditions and health conditions and other kinds of things that are being attributed to race when it's actually attributable to trauma and other kind of issues related to that. And so for those of you that are just joining, you're listening to Black Mental Health Matters. I'm Dr. Carryann Williams. I'm a psychiatrist here in Massachusetts. And my guest today is Nieisha Deed, who is a founder of PureSpark. And she is a mental health advocate and public speaker. And she's been sharing with us her story of what she's gone through, how she's recovered, and how she helps other people using her story and using all the things that she's learned about mental wellness in the Black community and otherwise. And so I guess I wanted to ask a little bit more about, okay, so now you've had your experience, you've made a decision that you need to kind of change your life. You've decided I can't be in corporate America anymore as an accountant. This is not my tribe. This is not my place. Mm-hmm. And so now you go to probably your PCP. You make sure you rule out medical issues. You know how to get connected to a psychiatrist to kind of get an assessment. Should I be on medication? And you have your talk therapist. What else would you say contributed to your healing? Tell us kind of more about your healing.
Yeah. So I was very fortunate because I am a part of a family that they won't make me an outcast. They just won't do that. So when things started getting rough in 2017, even though I was living in the DC area and most of my family lives in the Northeast, I was getting check-in calls from just about every family member every single day, multiple times a day, right? Like, something's off with Nieisha and we have to stay close to her because, we're her family and she doesn't have family down there. And so one day when I didn't pick up the phone, my family members knew that probably wasn't good news. And they were right. That was the day that I attempted. And so they did a wellness check and called my leasing company to check on me. And that's kind of how I went into the hospital from there. So, having a family that cares and also having a family that's educated in the mental health space really helps. So when I say they're educated, they're actually like therapists, so that really, really helped my healing. They gave me love and compassion even when I didn't have it for myself. That was huge, right? I was in the whole space of like, hurry up and get better, Nieisha, so that you could go back to work, just like I did in 2008. That was how I was like framing up 2017, like, I just want to hurry up and get over with this depression so that I could be, a healthy citizen and give back to, so, but they were like, no, you need to take your time, no matter how long it takes. And I'm like, what? Oh, you guys, like, I can't, this is, you know, and so, they having the compassion for me before I had it for myself was very, very helpful. They didn't rush me. They loved me, and they just allowed me to heal in my own time, which I know is a privilege. I know not a lot of people, especially people of color, Black people, have that, because everyone's kind of looking at you like, what is going on? And then I know that going to therapy helped, right? Me starting to get curious about my past and my past traumas, and just being like, oh, okay, this is interesting, because, I thought this way, but is that way a healthy way of thinking? Maybe I, should consider other ways of thinking, right? So therapy kind of helped me open up my mind. Yoga really helped me to connect with myself. And really being in a serious yoga practice for about a year, where I was going like 2 to 3 times a week, really, really helped when I paired it with my therapy. And just listening to myself, right, listening to my own intuition. And, like, for example, going outside when I need to get some fresh air, and being in the sun, like, those things were great for me. This is a big thing right now, boundaries, right? Creating boundaries and saying, like, I can only do XYZ, you know what I mean? Or, saying no when I really want to say no, instead of saying yes to everything and trying to appease everybody. I started to realize that it was okay to love myself and take care of myself. And I think that those were the main things that really helped me along with my healing and my wellness journey.
Wow. Wow. And for our listeners, if you want to call in, the phone number here is 617-238-7111. We're also streaming live on Facebook, on the Facebook page, heat981fm.com, if you want to follow the live stream on Facebook and drop a comment there as well. Just kind of talking with Nieisha about what are the various things that were helpful in healing from depression. And so there's the traditional stuff, checking into kind of the medical things, and then also the talk therapy. The talk therapy helped with perspective, helping you to reflect on the past, present, and future, and kind of like take stock of everything. And also yoga. And you mentioned how it helped you to be more connected to your body. And, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it's something I've been thinking a lot more about recently, because trauma has a way of disconnecting the mind and the body, right? Trauma is felt in the body. And a lot of times we'll do talk therapy, but the talk therapy helps only so far. And something like yoga is actually more of a kind of what I would call like a body-based intervention. It's like a some way that you can actually use your body in your treatment. And I think that it's one of the missing links sometimes with mental health treatment is a therapy that specifically targets connecting the mind and the body, and to kind of help us to increase our awareness of what we're feeling and experiencing. So we always say, listen to your body, but what if you have a hard time even being connected to your body, right? So something like yoga seems to make sense. And then the other part of it was just practical things like saying no, which is so hard for a lot of us because we get a lot of positive reinforcement from saying yes. People seem to be very accepting of us if we say yes to things. People can be very rejecting sometimes if we say no, and it's so hard to deal with. But if you don't say no, sometimes you're just going to end up being overloaded all of the time. So I do like that you included that. And also, again, mobilizing social supports, because depression can be so isolating. And so having a network of people that will still check in with you can sometimes be really, really helpful, in not turning them away, when they try to check in. Tell us a little bit about the role of telling your story, the advocacy part, and also in the advocacy part, I'm interested to know how your kind of perspective plays a role in your healing, and how you deal, I guess kind of like a compound question, but kind of like how you deal with the I guess the vulnerability. Sometimes people are ashamed to talk about what they went through. Like, how do you think about telling your story, and what role does it play in your emotional healing?
Yeah, so it's actually interesting. I think that I still somewhat disconnect when I share my story. I don't think that I am fully connected. Again, I think that that is kind of like, I don't know if it's a trauma response or a coping mechanism. I'm like, maybe it's both. But I think oftentimes when I'm sharing my story, I don't really connect that the person that I'm talking about is myself. Um, I think that it's still kind of hard to really go there emotionally and without breaking down. So, in order to kind of get through the story without like crying the whole time, I kind of just disconnect automatically without even thinking. I just disconnect. Um, and I'm not sure how that journey will end. I don't really know. But I do give myself time and space. Like if I need to, if I'm in a therapy session and I talk about it, that's where I'm connected. Like, and I'm crying and I'm boo-hooing because it was a traumatic experience, right? It was something that is a part of my past, and I'm able to kind of go about my life, but it's still very emotional. Um, but what I will say is the therapeutic part comes into play where I could see people's light bulbs going off, right? Or when I talk about the warning signs, or I kind of talk about my experience, because a lot of times people think that, depression only happens if you're like sexually assaulted or like something really like, and I'm like, it doesn't have to be that like grandiose, right? Like everybody's suffering is different. Um, and I always feel somewhat of a reward, if you will, when someone comes up to me and says like, I think I'm going to start therapy. Or like, thank you so much. Like, I don't feel so alone. That's when I know that I'm not doing this in vain. There's a purpose, there's a need. And that's really, I think, therapeutic for me, because I know that I didn't just go through this situation just to go through it,
Yeah.
Yes, it was painful. Yes, it was traumatic, but like, um, out of it came something so beautiful,
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's important for us to know that it's not, then when we think about mental health, mental wellness, it's not
mhm,
kind of like something that happens to other people.
mhm.
I think a lot of times we distance ourselves like, oh, those other people who have depression. It's like, well, actually, it happens to us. Like it's just all of us. It's just not some kind of like other group of people that go through it. It's right here. And I think that's one of the powers of sharing your story too, is that they can see you walk in and talk about it and say, oh, she doesn't seem so different from me. And she went through this. So, why am I thinking that I'm like the exception? Or why am I thinking this is such a bad thing that I should be ashamed of? This is just something that happens to people. If you're alive, you're going to go through tough times, and everybody has tough times. And so I think it's important for folks listening to just to know that, and to take that in, that we all go through things. And just to kind of find your way out. I think there's a question from Facebook. What are the signs for friends and family to look out for to help intervene at
Mm,
an early stage? So if you notice someone and you think maybe I'm a little bit worried about them, but I might just overthinking it, what are some things that you would say maybe your friends and family said to you, or that they should look for?
yeah. I think that, depending on how close you are to these friends or family, they kind of know when things just don't seem quote unquote right with someone, right? So what my family did, and this is something that you can choose to do or whatever, is that they made sure that they stayed in constant contact with me. Even if it was just a text or a quick phone call to check in, they were always in contact with me, because a part of it too was that they didn't live there. So how else were they going to stay in contact? And this was before the pandemic happened. So there wasn't really much of like the video chat thing going on, but they were calling. So it's really, I think for me, it's really about using your own common sense, your own intuition, and thinking, okay, well, dang, this person normally does XYZ all the time, and they're not doing XYZ, and they haven't been doing XYZ for the past, month or a month and a half. That might be time to like do like a little check-in. You know what I mean? Like, hey, you normally, are doing these things, and I'm a little bit concerned, coming from a place of love, right? Not really judgment, but just coming from a place of love and curiosity. And then kind of seeing how they respond, and then being ready for how they respond. Like, if you're not ready to hear the worst of what they might have to say, it probably behooves you not, to go there with that person, right? If you're going to be in a place where you're going to be judging that person, and that can be kind of dangerous. So you yourself, make sure that you are you have the tools, the proper tools, and you do your education before you go trying to save someone else, because what you say really matters, especially at this point. And there are great resources, right, that you can share with people. There's a suicide prevention helpline. There are all these great directories where people can go. There could just be you going for a walk with this friend, like, hey, let's go on a walk, like it's a nice day outside, you want to go for a walk? And sometimes you just being there and just listening and not trying to fix it, and just being there to listen, is suicide prevention, or is helping them with their wellness journey.
That's true. It's interesting because a lot of people, there's not a lot of people that say that. They say, you know what, you don't have to try to fix what's going on with your family member, with your friend. Just being there, being that listening ear, spending time checking in on them, allowing them to express themselves, and being ready to hear what they have to say without judging them. That is suicide prevention as well. And people will sometimes, come back and kind of say, remember that time when you said you just came by and went with me for a walk? You didn't know that day I was planning ... But when you came and hung out, I changed that plan.
Mm-hmm.
You never know.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
So you had started this organization, PureSpark.
Mm-hmm.
And what is kind of your vision for where you want this to go?
Yeah, yes. I'm so excited for PureSpark. Because literally it started, like I said, like a social media presence. That was it. And kind of just not even knowing what I wanted to do with it, but just knowing that I needed some kind of platform that was about mental health. Even the name, coming up with the name and the logo, I had no idea. I was just like, oh, I want it to look like a mosaic. So if you look at our at the PureSpark logo, it's just a lot of colors, because I'm like, oh, broken pieces, put it together to make something beautiful. That was the idea behind the logo. And then the name was really, it just came out of the thin air. And I was like, oh, I really like the way that sounds. And then we put a meaning to it. But to answer your question, where are we trying to go? By the end of this year, we're looking to attract and retain 100 wellness providers on our website. So if you are a wellness provider living in the Massachusetts area, you're a person of color, please go check out our website and go ahead and apply so you can be on the directory. And then, I really want to create spaces where we can really uplift different forms of healing. So whether that be like a symposium or an expose, whatever, but just being able to have people from different practices come, and then the community can kind of touch them, talk to them, maybe even test out some of their healing practices. It's really important, like you said in the beginning, for us to educate people. And that's one of our 3 pillars, is to educate, connect, and end the stigma. So yeah, those are the two things. And then I would love the opportunity to talk to more people. So being able to go into colleges and universities, maybe even HBCUs specifically, so that they can see people that look like them talking about this stuff would bring me so much joy. And just really being able to help people realize that, like, hey, this is okay. Like, a diagnosis is not the end of your life. It just might be an indication that, you might need to change and do certain things differently, but it's not the end of your life. And I'm living proof.
Wow. So yeah, so if you guys are listening and you are a wellness provider, and the nice thing about this particular directory is it's not just about therapists only, and it's not, psychiatry only. It is other forms of wellness. So if you're looking for, I like talking about some of these alternative things like art therapy, music therapy, dance therapy, neurofeedback. There's like all these different things that people can do in addition to traditional therapies, not necessarily in opposition to it.
Right.
Think about going to, is it, what's your website? Is it Your PureSpark?
Yeah,
Or
so it's www.yourpurespark.com.
okay, so yourpurespark.com. And you can reach out there and see if you want to be added to that directory so people can find you. Hopefully by the end of the year, you have at least 100, so that people will be able to use that wellness directory to find providers of color from various backgrounds. And I know one of the questions that comes up is, insurance is not going to cover some of this stuff. How am I going to pay for it?
I know. So that actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I totally forgot about that piece. We are looking to help with one of, like, if you think about all the barriers, right, to getting help, that is one of the barriers. Stigma is a barrier, and actual, like, socioeconomic background, people not being able to afford it. And so I am trying to figure out creative ways to help to raise money so that we can either supplement or pay for people's treatments. And that's actually something that I'm looking to do this year. So we definitely have a lot on our plate. We're definitely thinking about things and how we're going to solve certain problems. But I'm excited. Like, I'm super excited.
Yeah. So, and if you guys listening out there have the ability to donate or have the interest in supporting, Nieisha's organization formally, definitely reach out for that too, because, that could be, something that you could even form a partnership or help other people to be able to get services that they need. And there's so many ways that you can do that, even just offering giveaways or deals for X number of sessions. And so people have a chance to experience the wealth of resources that are out there. So now you also have a peer support group. Can you tell us a little bit about the peer support group?
Yes, so that's correct. So we meet every Wednesday night from 7 to 8, and people can register on our website. And we talk about different things, mostly in the mental wellness space. We'll have conversations like, what's the difference between a life coach and a therapist? Because oftentimes people get confused and think that life coach is the same as therapy. And I'm like, no, it's not. They're both great, but they are different, right? So really helping to, like I said, that education part, educate people on those topics, and then giving time for people to connect, right? Because it's so helpful sometimes when you're not in the struggle alone, right? That's why group therapy and peer support can be so therapeutic in a sense, because and not to say that peer support is therapy, because it's not. But it allows people to kind of voice what's going on in their life and allow it to be heard by other people. And other people say, yeah, me too. I'm going through that. And then sometimes people being able to offer up like support and say like, hey, I'm struggling at home with my child and doing e-learning and working, and, I'm having these struggles. And then someone might say, well, wow, this is what's been helpful for me, right? So having that lived experience, right? And people being able to kind of share those kind of tools, because it's not only me and the presenter that can offer help, it's even the community that can kind of offer help to each other. So Like I said, we've been doing it for a year. And, most of the people that attend are women of color, like millennial age, like mid 30s to early 40s. And we found it to be pretty helpful for people. So we'll continue to do it.
Yeah, and I'd say peer support is powerful because I think there's definitely certain things that people will be more receptive to hearing it from a peer than hearing it from a professional. Like I work with teenagers, and if I tell a teenager to do something, they're less likely to do it.
Yes.
But if their friend tells them, they're more likely to do it. Uh, so there's kind of there's that kind of peer influence starts young, but even for adults, it still is a really, really big way that a lot of people hear about things that are helpful. And it just comes from like again, a person you can relate to, that is like, oh, this isn't something that is for someone else. This is for people like you and I, this is something that relates to us. And so I guess in our kind of final minutes, I like to ask folks, what are some of the things that they find most enjoyable about their current work? I think you answered it a little bit earlier, but just to expand on that a little bit, what do you enjoy the most about even like organization building and being an advocate and all of that?
Everything. I love, like, I used to talk to my sister who's a nurse, my another sister of mine, my oldest sister who lives in Cambridge, and she's a nurse at Brigham and Women, ICU nurse at Brigham and Women Hospital. And ever since she started her career, she's obviously started her career before me because she's my older sister, and she always would say how much she loves it, and I just would look at her like, how do you love your career? Like, I don't understand. Like, I can never fathom, how do you go to work loving your job? And now I'm like, oh, I get it. Like, I get it now. So I love the idea of creating something. I never had the opportunity really to be creative at my job. So being an entrepreneur and, being a founder of an organization, I really have a chance to say, I have an idea and then create it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, and I think that right there is a lot of satisfaction. But then being able to work with who I choose to work with. A lot of people that help me, like the people that help to build my website or the people that help me with my social media, they're people of color, right? And so it's like I get to work with people that look like me. And that is something that I never really had a chance to do. And just being able to hear people's satisfaction, right? Just really being able to see um, my work help someone is like so satisfying. Whereas before, when you're working at such a big corporation, you don't really get to see that real impact. You're just plugging away, and then the next project comes, and you're plugging away, and you don't really get the satisfaction of, someone, being really impacted by the work that you're doing. And I get to see that, almost every day. So I think those three things really make this work very rewarding, and I hope to be able to do it for the rest of my life.
Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I think your story is powerful. It's inspiring. And one of our Facebook users, Teresa, said, yeah, thank you for sharing. It's important not to ignore the signs and be proactive. It's a battle that you do not have to face alone. Folks are grateful that you've shared your story today. And so they can find you on yourpurespark.com. Also on Instagram at yourpurespark.
Yes. Facebook as well.
Facebook.
And Twitter, LinkedIn. We try to be everywhere. And I think we're probably gonna have a YouTube at some point. I don't know. But you can Google us and find us just about anywhere.
And so that way they can connect with you around any of these things: donations, wellness provider directory, peer group, or even just questions.
Absolutely.
So guys, connect with Nieisha and her organization PureSpark. And again, tune in next week to Black Mental Health Matters. I'm here every week at 1 p.m. on Sundays on 98.1 FM, The Urban Heat. So I will talk with you again next week.